Hello, and welcome to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator, Katina Lane Fomby, Human Resources Director, Renewal by Andersen. We are excited to have Katina and our panelists for a panel discussion titled Change Management, Lessons Learned in 2023. Welcome, Katina. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Nick. And again, welcome everyone. And so before we get started with today's session, I would love for our esteemed panelists to do a quick introduction, and then we'll get into some of the exciting questions that we have here and continue our discussion. So I'll turn it over to our panelists.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Candace Griffith, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for Health Prime. We are a revenue cycle management company that strives to be a strategic partner for value-based healthcare practices.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Panetta, the Chief People Officer at Pareto Health. We're based out of Philadelphia, and we aim to help small and mid-sized employers with better health insurance options. Nice to be here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Bruno. I'm the Executive Vice President of Human Resources for JSR Life Sciences. We are located all over the world and helping to impact patients' lives. So we're excited to be here. Katina, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So our first question, and I'm going to point this question directly to Monica, so I'll have you to kick us off. So Monica, from your experience, what were the most notable changes organizations experienced over the past 2 years?
Yeah, so I know for me, and I'm sure everyone else is thinking the same, but accelerated adoption of remote work has been one of the biggest challenges and benefits, I think, but also trying to figure out how to create and, sustain the engagement and the culture when you have such a dispersed workforce. Also, I think the hiring landscape as it pertains to having that dispersed workforce, where are candidates now? Where are they looking for jobs? Obviously it's a great thing when you have a bigger talent pool to go to, but then acclimating them into the culture and, making sure that everyone feels included. That was a really big challenge that I've seen over the past 2 years. Also, and, kind of helping that out is the digital transformation piece as well. So how quickly we've had to not only adapt to, but go seek out new digital technologies to be able to have things like digital collaboration tools and more recently AI functionality and all of those things that help us with the challenge. But as the HR professionals here, we're usually the ones bringing those to the forefront and exploring and trying new things and all of that. And then with that comes cybersecurity. So I would say those are probably my 3 that have been the biggest challenge over the past 2 years.
Excellent. Candace or Deborah, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I echo exactly what Monica said. We had a lot of challenges, especially moving to a remote and hybrid workforce, but everything that Monica said is in line with kind of the challenges that we had in 2023.
Excellent.
I think
Deborah.
some of the things I would add are really around the collaboration with the HR organization. So we're used to change. It's what we do. We flex all the time. We adapt to different workforce, we adapt to macroeconomic trends. Change is our middle name, if you will. But the way we had to intersect with EHS, as an example, when you were thinking about COVID protocols, the way you intersect with IT, as Monica was talking about, cybersecurity. So there was a lot of overlap and collaboration that always happened in the background, but I think sort of accelerated it and put it to the forefront in the ways that HR had to really lean in on some of these other areas that perhaps we didn't in the future, and understanding some different protocols that perhaps we didn't understand in the future or didn't have a greater awareness of. So it sort of changed our internal skills and competencies and expectations of what we do as an HR organization.
Yeah, I like that perspective, and I'll just add for my TA colleagues on the phone. One of the things that I kind of saw was something where we had to be a little more agile and pivot. It's just from a recruitment standpoint. It's become so much harder to recruit talent because, to your point, Monica, we went from being in the office to operating in the virtual space, and then for a lot of people, once we returned to the office, that became, I won't necessarily say an opportunity, but somewhat of a challenge for them, right, if you will, because they had, over the last 2 years, adapted to working in a virtual space. So we've kind of found here at RBA that, some of our candidates don't want to relocate to the Twin Cities. And so it's made somewhat of a challenge, right? Not difficult or hard, but somewhat of a challenge to at times recruit top talent. So that was one of the other additional things I wanted to add. But no, great discussion, great discussion. So this next question I'm going to direct to Candace. So what does change management mean for your company? And what are the biggest challenges associated with this?
That's a great question. For us here at Health Prime, change management is really about taking a formalized approach to transition and transformation of organization, specifically with dealing with our goals, our processes, and our technologies. We focus on 3 specific areas of change management. They're the most common ones, which is developmental, transitional, and transformational. In terms of the challenges that we had at Health Prime, for us, it's always about getting the buy-in and commitment of the employees. And so we really like to use the Connor Patterson model of the commitment curve. And that really helps explain how individuals' commitment to organization change increases and decreases over time. So we always have to work through that commitment curve and make sure that our employees are moving along with us on that curve and working towards our change management goals and objectives.
Excellent. I like that commitment curve. I love it. Deborah, Monica, anything you want to weigh in on that question?
Yeah, one thing I would add, and those are all really great points, Candace. I would add that change management is hard. It's hard for the people executing, and it's hard for the people on the journey. And it's the communication. It's really about how you communicate the why behind it. Most everyone involved in change wants to know, how does it impact me? What does this mean for me? And the ways that you can help alleviate fear, right? Because change is often associated with fear, is to explain the why. And to Candace's point, have people be part of the buy-in. You can have focus groups, you can do employee roundtables. I love the idea of the commitment curve, because that's about, where are we? The executive team might think we're over here on the journey, and the employee population may be somewhere over here. And so, figuring out where we all are is important, and having check-ins along the way is important.
Yeah, I like that perspective, Deborah. I always say taking them along for their journey, right? I think oftentimes as leaders, we build out, models, change management, we do all of these wonderful things, but we don't necessarily engage the individuals who I say has to make the wheels turn on the wagon, right? So definitely taking them along for the journey. I think one, it helps to inform them, but it also, says that, hey, we value you and we appreciate your input, right? And you're just as important, as anyone else, right, at this company. So thank you. Monica, anything you'd like to add before we go to the next question?
Yeah, I was just actually going to say, part of that is understanding, like, doesn't have to be a one size fits all. And a lot of times it can't be because people, to Deb's point, are on different parts of the journey. So just understanding that sometimes one plan has to turn into one strategy with little plans underneath. And that's okay. Like, I think meeting people where they are is probably the most important and the biggest headline of what I learned over the past 2 years.
Nice, thank you. So this next question, Deborah, is for you, but it's really kind of going back to question number one. And I think a lot of us alluded to some of the changes over the last couple of years was around the work model. So I would like to understand, what does your organization's current work model look like, and what's been most effective for your organization? So is it remote? Is it hybrid? It's, so speak a little bit about that.
Sure. So the answer is it's everywhere. So it's remote, it's hybrid. It depends on the role, it depends on the department, it depends on where we are in the life cycle of our product development. So for life sciences, we don't shut down. We didn't shut down during COVID either, because we're manufacturing drugs. So the good kind, just for so we're clear. Um, what we do is we really talk about what's important in a role, what the expectations are of the role. Can you do your job from other places? The challenge with that is, well, then you have all these employees who want to actually move and who want to maybe take a vacation and be in Europe while they work remotely. And they're brought up a lot of payroll challenges and tax considerations and things that not everybody understands. So for us, it's really about understanding where the organization is. And Monica said this a minute ago, and this is my mantra a lot in HR, which is it's not a one size fits all. So what works for our industry or our company is very different and unique to what's happening in other parts of the world. It's also very different depending on the department. Facilities has to be on site, manufacturing has to be on site, quality usually on site, HR, IT, finance, we probably flex a lot more than some of these others. The challenge is figuring out how to build culture. Monica talked about this before, and also making sure it doesn't feel like the haves and the have-nots, right? Working remotely, I think we've all recognized, is a benefit. It's a perk. We've seen all the studies around why employees prefer this, but there are jobs where you cannot work remotely. And so what are the other kinds of things that you can do for that employee population so they don't feel like they're missing out on a particular benefit or a perk? Again, it goes back to understanding your culture, understanding your employee population, understanding the why behind your making these decisions, whether you're allowing a remote hybrid or bringing people back to the office. We've all been plagued with this question yet again in the recent weeks and months. And so the answer is it really depends. It depends on the role, it depends on the culture, it depends on the company. And at JSR, we're a bunch of different companies. And so we don't all follow the same pattern. And it was the same at Nitto Denko Avisha, where I just came from. Same thing. It's really about what's important to that organization and success. How do you measure performance, productivity, success, and articulating expectations so everyone's on the same page?
So what I heard, so that was a great perspective, Deborah. So what I heard was keeping people at the forefront, right? And I like when Monica, and then you just, shared it as well. It's not a one size fits all. And I just think back to some of my time in HR where oftentimes when there were changes or policies, if we want to just use the whole return to office, not return to work, but return to office, right? Because we've always been working. And so, but sometimes I find that we create policies or we make decisions that may be corporate centric, but what I consider not field friendly. And when I think about the field friendly, it's the folks on the front line, like you said, the manufacturing, the quality, those folks who we know that may not have the luxury of working remote, right? Or even a hybrid model. So, Monica, Candace, want to add any color to what Deborah just shared?
Sure, I can add a little bit. Like Deborah said, so at Health Prime for many years, we were an in-person workforce. Of course, COVID forced us to send employees home. And let me just take a moment to thank IT and HR departments around the world during that time that really had to quickly mobilize and figure out how to get their organizations at home and do it safely, successfully, securely, and also be in compliance with different, IT and technology infrastructures that we have throughout our organization. Once we came on the other side of COVID and we realized that the world had changed, we've transitioned to a hybrid workforce. We really wanted to give employees flexibility to be home because their lives had changed during that time. And so we wanted to honor that and support them through that transition. But like Deborah said, we also had employees that are required to be in the office. So we set up special protocols and times where they could work from home if they achieve certain metrics or hit different goals. So we wanted to make sure we were just being very flexible during that time. And I think we've seen the benefits with increased productivity throughout our organization while allowing people to be home. So for us, it's hybrid now, and it's working very well for us.
Excellent. Monica.
Yeah, and I was just going to say to both Deb and Candace's points, a big thing, that actionable point that we put into place is just that employee feedback loop. Like, we had to really refine that over the past 2 years, because how we were getting feedback and how we were talking to our employees and understanding how they were feeling and what they wanted, and things change so often. I mean, we even had people who were like, well, that's great that you said I could work from home, but I actually don't have a place at home to work. I live in a flat, so I can't work from home at all. So what are you going to do for me? So then you had that situation. But I do think that feedback loop, that we've gotten a lot better at that because of the last 2 years. So
Nice. Thank you. So Deborah, this next question is also for you. So how do you successfully manage a distributed workforce while promoting productivity?
Yeah, it's a tough one. And it's certainly a question we continue to talk about as leaders across the business. Again, it's not a one size fits all. It's really important to have policies and expectations in place so that there's a clear definition around which roles can do hybrid, which roles can be remote, and the why behind it, right? There really needs to be an understanding, to Monica's point on the feedback loop, and having alignment around what are the expectations, and more importantly, how are you defining productivity? And I don't mean you, Katina, but I mean the proverbial you. I continue to hear, and we did during COVID, well, people are more productive in the office. I have not seen data that actually supports that. I really haven't. I've seen um, people's thoughts, opinions, pontification, but I have not actually seen data that says these data points show that people are more productive in the office. Some people are. Because it's their preference, or as Monica pointed out, because their socioeconomic or home situation is such that they can't be productive at home. Those things are different. Those are more the anomalies. And again, it's about understanding your employee population, and getting that feedback and that insight into what works. What I say is, your work ethic in the office is the same as your work ethic at home. And what I mean by that is, if you're the person who's at your desk, head down, focused, really getting through whatever it is you have on your plate, you're going to take that same work ethic and do that at home. If you're the person who walks around the office and stops at everyone's office and stops at the coffee and is in the cafeteria, and again, I'm not editorializing on if one is better than the other, I'm just giving models. You're likely going to be that person when you're at home. And so it is really about understanding how people need to be managed, right? Again, management is not a one size fits all. And COVID showed that exponentially. People need to be managed differently. People want to be managed differently. And so it's important to have real, vulnerable, authentic conversations with your team together, but also one-on-one, understanding, do you prefer your camera on? Do you prefer it off? Understanding inclusivity, DE&I comes into this as well when we think about, again, people's personal circumstances at home and maybe not having the right environment where they can be on screen. You have disabilities and people who don't feel comfortable being on screen, or others who want to be on screen. So it goes back to, what do you mean by productivity? What are the metrics? How are you measuring your employees? Are you aligned on what that looks like? How is that defined? And don't forget that just because there is a screen here, you're still managing people. You're still building relationships. We've been a global organization for so many years. We just used telephones. My kids will laugh, but you had to dial a country code and a city code, and you had to get through to your colleagues on a landline. That didn't stop us from building relationships or being productive. We just found different ways to adapt to technology, going back to technology. So it's about your culture. But again, you really have to have the hard conversations to admit, why doesn't this work for you as a manager, or why isn't it working for you as an employee? If COVID showed us anything or highlighted anything, it's about being real and authentic and vulnerable, and having those conversations with your people and really adapting.
Excellent. Monica, Candace?
Yeah, no, Deb, I totally agree with that notion as well. And, again, it's kind of coming back to that, like meeting people where they are and making sure that where they are is probably more important than anything else. And having that, I remember in the beginning of, and I don't even want to say COVID, but the beginning of when we started to kind of go back to the office, I was so tired at the end of the day, more so than like any other time, even during COVID, because there was so much extra effort exerted to get to every person that I needed to talk to. I felt like I had to go that extra mile to say, let me check in on this person. Okay, well, the way to do that is talk to them directly, right? You need to have that personal touch. But it was just, it took a lot of energy units to get to the people, to get that feedback from them, until we put that nice little feedback cycle in place. But yeah, I mean, I think you just need to know where they are in order to meet them where they are.
It's fair. Candace, I see you nodding your head like, yes.
No, I definitely agree with what both Monica and Deborah said. Right on point.
Excellent. Thank you. So Candace, this next question is actually for you. So what does effective communication look like for your team?
Oh, well. So for my team in particular, we are an organization that's global. We're in 3 different countries and 34 states, and all of the folks on my HR team serve as backups for one another. So for us, it's very important to keep our lines of communication open, but to also have them be very strong. We are really big on prioritizing two-way communication, which, as we know, is about speaking, active listening, and providing feedback. And so it really helps us understand how each other works and be on the same page in terms of what's happening in the organization, so that no one is ever kept out of the loop, and no one is ever blindsided by a request that comes through or a question that's being asked of them. So really just focusing on two-way communication on our HR team.
Yeah, so I think for assuming, I don't know if you mean just the HR team in general, or if you mean sort of teams in general. So I'm going to do the broader, because I think they're very similar. And what I would say is, remember that people receive communication differently, and they need a different vehicles to communicate. And not everyone has access to laptops or email or digital technology, because they might be in manufacturing, as an example. So just make sure that you're thinking through all of the different vehicles to communicate to your employees. So we use digital screens in the cafeteria and break rooms, as an example. Any important messages, we ensure that supervisors or managers right on the front lines are really communicating those during department meetings or shift handovers. So we always talk about push-pull technology. How much are you pushing out versus asking employees to go find? So an intranet or a SharePoint is a great example of that. You're asking someone to go find the information. And we all know we're all very busy and getting inundated with all different kinds of inputs from various technological modalities, if you will. And so if there are important messages, figure out the best way to communicate to employees. And oftentimes that is ask. Do you prefer email? Do you prefer text? Do these global messages make sense? Is anyone reading them? Do you prefer the intranet or the SharePoint site? Would you rather get it in your inbox? We have too many emails, so it is again, it's not a one size fits all. And oftentimes the answer is a lot of different ways. And just make sure that you're clear, concise, and ask for feedback. I think that's really important when you're sending out important messages, or maybe some that might be controversial, or you feel might have an emotional reaction from employees, hard messages. Ask the people that you trust in the businesses, ask employees that you trust, so that you can get objective feedback and pivot along the way.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Deb, at first you think, my options are email, Slack, text, screen. Like, the other thing that I think changed for me was, if I need to create a forum, I'm going to create a forum of communication. So, like, to your point about the line managers, that's exactly what we did. We created a people leader monthly touch point, so we could give those managers all the things we wanted them to tell their people, because we noticed that nor screen, nor text, nor email, nor Slack was actually working. So we had to go create that forum to make that happen. So just a, outside the box thought there, but
Yeah, and Monica, just to jump on that before Candace or Katina weigh in, find out if those messages are being delivered, right? Because oftentimes we make the assumption that we've asked a manager or director or supervisor, whoever, to deliver a message, only to find out employees are like, I didn't hear that. I didn't know that was a thing. And so finding ways to get into the employee population and figure out if those messages were delivered is really, really important as well. Otherwise, you're not going to know if it was effective.
Excellent. So Deborah, I don't want you to think that I'm picking on you, but I have a question from the audience. So I'll start
Okay.
with you again. Ready?
Okay.
So the question is, how do you address reluctance to change from employees, including reluctancy to return to in-person settings? And I think that's a question that we can all answer, and I definitely want all of the panelists to weigh in. But Deborah, we'll go ahead and start with you, and then we'll make our way from Monica to Candace.
Sure. So again, it goes back to understanding the why. Understanding why you want employees to come back, understanding why there's reluctance. This is going to be a mantra from all of us because it's the reality. There's not a one size fits all. So I can't say to you, here's the magic wand, go do this and it will work, because every person's circumstances are different. And every organization is different as to why they want people in the office, why they believe it's important. And so it's about having conversations, having real, hard, authentic, vulnerable conversations where you speak to employees and try to understand, where is the reluctance coming from? Is there just a disconnect on what's important to that employee versus what the company really needs and values? And so, my advice is to really have those conversations and be really open and honest about the reason to come back. You have to be able to come back into the office. You have to be able to articulate your why. As I learned growing up, my dad used to say all the time, because I said so. That doesn't work. And so really helping employees understand why it's important, and having employee forums or employee roundtables, or, to Monica's point, a feedback loop, and an opportunity to hear from people and understand their why.
Yeah, and when I think about change management in books and articles I've read on change, you always hear this little saying that says, in order to get people where you are, you must first have to go where they are. So I think sometimes that reluctancy is not um, where they don't necessarily want to do something, but it's like, do you understand, to your point, Deborah, do you understand my why? And I think that's important, getting to understand the employee's why. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it may change the ultimate outcome or the ultimate decision, because there are some tough decisions that we as leaders have to make. But I think it does, again, at least says that I value your input, or I value your perspective. So I'd like to hear from you, Monica, and then of course Candace, on your thoughts on that.
yeah, I think one thing, just to go back to the question of, like, how do you address it? What's an actionable thing you can do? So I think the one thing I learned is leadership modeling. So it's one thing to tell your team, hey, you have to be here 4 days a week, but if you're not actually there, then that fizzles out really fast. So my advice would be whatever, model what you're preaching, because that's what your people are going to do. So, you got to kind of stick with it. And I know it's tough because sometimes some of us are in different states as our teams are, and you can't always bring everyone together. But, if you're going to ask people to go back, then, I found that the first question is, well, are you going back? Are you going to be there? So I think leadership role modeling is critical for the pull through and success.
It's a great point.
Excellent. Leading by example. Candace.
Yeah, that is a really great question. This makes me think to an article I read in the Harvard Business Review about employees losing their patience with change initiatives, right? There has been so much since 2020 with just change and how we work, being in office, out of office, COVID, all of those things that employees had to bear the brunt of. And three things that I got out of the article that have been really helpful for our organization as we go through a lot of ebbs and flows of the company is really building in proactive times for rest and sustain energy, right? Not being in this constant loop of change within the organization, making sure employees have time to catch their breath, get caught up on all the changes that have occurred, how it affects them, and how they can better now move forward in that change. Another thing that we talked about in that article is really moving away from that top-down approach and more open source your change plans. So really embracing bringing in employees as active participant in the change plans and the implementation of those changes. And then lastly, taking another look at the role that managers play in change. A lot of times we really rely on the managers to distribute the messaging throughout the organization and to really be a part of and lead the charge with every single change that leadership wants to implement. So really having the managers be more of resilience builders within the organization and really building up their teams to be better well equipped to handle change in the organization. So I thought that was three really great steps that we took to help us eliminate that employee burnout when it comes to the multitude of change initiatives we've had over the last 4 years.
Yeah, that's a great
Excellent.
point. Katina, can I add one more thing? Just again,
Absolutely.
back to Monica's point about what's actionable. The thing that I kept hearing, not from my organization specifically, but from colleagues, friends, family, was I'm in the office and I'm the only one here. I'm in the office and there's no one here. And so to Monica's point, try to pick days where there are cohorts of people. And so the purpose that most people talk about of coming back to the office is so that we can collaborate, we can run into each other. So my actionable advice would be, pick days where a bunch of you can be together, because that is the point. Don't have it be each person picks a day, because then again, you're going to isolate employees and they're not going to understand the why behind it, especially if they're sitting there by themselves. So that would be something else I would consider.
Yeah, Deborah, and I think you bring up a valid point. So I want to just build on that. So not only I'm coming to the office and I'm the only one here, but what I've seen most recently is that we're in the office, but we're still doing calls via Teams or via Zoom. So what have we actually accomplished? So being very intentional about meeting in person, literally in person, not sitting in your office or your cubicle, jumping on a Teams or Zoom's call, right? Because that'll be counterproductive to the fact that you've actually came in the office if we're really not going to physically engage.
Yeah, and I
All
would
right.
say one
Okay.
thing that
Mhm.
I actually kind of I was thinking about this the other day, but there was a point where, when we went to recruit, we're like, ooh, we have this huge talent pool now, we can recruit from anywhere. But I know, like, I go through this too. I'm the only person that's local on my team. So it's also then thinking through that, okay, I know it's not feasible to tell people come to the office every Tuesday when they live in another state. So it's creating that other way of collaboration. Is it 4 times a year? Is it everyone knows when it is the 4 times a year? It doesn't have to be every week. I think sometimes we all think like it's a consistent day a week, but that's not always the case for a lot of teams because they're so spread out. So
Yeah, that's a great point that you made, Monica, and definitely a good segue into our next question. So what are some of the ways that you clarify priorities and manage follow-up on initiatives with remote employees?
That's a great question. We definitely experienced some of that at Health Prime. And one of the things that we try to focus on is really making sure that employees had clear metrics for when they were working from home, and also that they understood timelines. I think one of the things for me as a leader that I've learned over the past couple of years is making sure that employees know when you are expecting something to be due. I can't tell you the number of times where I've asked someone to do something, or someone has asked me to do something, but there isn't a clear deadline. And then I may be having them ask about it or follow up on it out of nowhere, and I wasn't prepared, but I'm thinking, well, they didn't give me a date, so it's when I get it done. But in their head, they needed it done by Tuesday, right? So we just really try to make sure that employees know when something is due and what someone's expectation is of how the project should go, what the deliverables are, and what the metrics will be.
I'm going to add something or say something that might be slightly controversial, but I need us all to be thinking this way, or I'm imploring that we open our minds to think differently. It doesn't matter where I'm working, the work is still getting done. So that question leads me to think that you think it needs to be done differently because they're remote. What I would say to you is use the same techniques or methods that Candace just outlined basic management. I mean, that is what we do every day. It doesn't matter if you're sitting 5 feet from the other person or 3,000 miles away. Deadlines, metrics, SMART goals, the company rolls out their priorities. It should lead to a function priorities, department to priorities, individual priorities, and all of those have metrics, which then lead to your performance review. That hasn't changed. That has not changed. And we need to stop thinking that because we work remotely, the way we work is different or the expectations is different. It's not. So I think people might be overcomplicating what is still truly basic management. Have conversations with your employees, understand expectations, outline your expectations. None of that has changed. And when you had a global team before, if you've had a global team or you've had people in other parts of the world before, you used the same methodologies that you used with someone who is down the hall from you. So try not to overcomplicate this or think that this has to be different because they're not sitting across the desk from me or I haven't run into them in the cafeteria. Use the same great management techniques that hopefully you've learned throughout your career, or reverse, if you've learned from negative experiences, leverage those and don't do those. At the end of the day, we're still talking about getting work done. We still have to be profitable. We still have KPIs and metrics. So back that up and think through, well, how have I always done this? All you're doing is delivering the message differently. It's across a screen versus maybe down the hall.
Yeah, Deborah, and I think you bring up a valid point, because what I've seen is that oftentimes some leaders, not all, we're focusing so much on the where, right? Where it's being done, as opposed to what is being done. Right. And so I used to always think about when I would have leaders that say, hey, I need them in the office. And I'd say, I've showed them some data that says that some of my problem employees were not the ones that were working remote. Most of the employees that I had on performance improvement were sitting right in the office. And so just really changing that mindset, to your point, of not necessarily focus on where the work is being done, but what are we accomplishing, right? So I love that.
I
Thanks for bringing that up.
I'd also add, is there potentially an unconscious bias happening that we're having a bias saying because you're home, you're watching your kids or you're taking care of someone else or you're watching soap operas and eating bonbons. I have worked harder and longer days sitting here in my home office than I have at the office because my office is 2 feet from my bedroom and the phone is right in my hand. And so I'd also challenge all of us to think, is it perhaps that you're projecting and potentially you have an unconscious bias about what you think may or may not be happening, not within the corporate walls. And so I challenge all of us to step back and reflect as an employee, but also as a manager. Could that be happening?
That's fair. That's fair. Our next question, and I'll direct this one to Monica. What were some of the biggest challenges for change management in 2023 in your organization?
I would say rapid technology acceleration. I mean, I feel like we heard the word chat GPT, AI, and all of a sudden it was, well, how are you using this? What's the next thing? Like, what are you doing with it? Crystal ball, like, tell us what we need to do. So another partnership with IT, short, fast following from having to sort of scramble on the remote work and flexible work stuff is let's work together on, do we want people to use chat GPT on their work computer? What are the rules? What are the outline? How do we want them to obviously harness this awesome technology in the right way that's safe and protects the company? So that was, I think, one of the biggest challenges, but also then once figuring it out, one of the biggest benefits. I would say the other thing is just keeping, readjusting policies and guidelines from some of the COVID leftover stuff that we wanted to change, and how do we communicate that? And there was a point where, the vaccine piece was a hot topic. Like, do you need to have that to come into the office? And then all of a sudden it was, not really many people do have that anymore, and it sort of fizzled away. So it was just kind of keeping up with the trends and making sure that we were, updating our guidelines and processes accordingly.
Excellent, thank you. Candace, Deborah, anything you want to quickly add?
I think I'll add something to what Deborah said in one of her answers earlier about how you communicate change to employees. I think one of the challenges that we always have, but in 2023 in particular, is really helping employees understand how the change affects them and why it's relevant to them, right? Companies change. I mean, that's just the way businesses go. You have to be agile in the market. And we always say the change is helpful to the company for X, Y, and Z. And that is telling people at a high level what the change is for, but down to the individual employee and how they do their job and how they are successful in their job. How does the change directly impact how they will do their job differently? What are the metrics that have changed for their job, and how does it help them enhance their job or work life at our organization? So just really making sure that the messaging is clear and that we're effectively communicating what this change actually means. That's a roadblock that we run into every year when there's change, but in particular in 2023, because we had some big changes come our way.
Excellent. And so, Deborah, I'm going to throw the ball back to you for our last question, but we can all weigh in. So, what best practices can be used to analyze how change directly affects performance and employee behavior?
Oh, great question. Why do I get this one? No, I'm just kidding.
We're a team here. We're all going to
Right.
answer it.
Monica, my mic's not working. Over to you. Just kidding. Again, it comes back to setting expectations up front. So, what is it that you're trying to change? What behavior? What process? Having a baseline. Most people start the change and go, okay, this is what the results say. And my question is, well, how did we improve? Where did we start? And there's a lot of blank faces that go, oops, we forgot to benchmark where we were. So it's important to have clear metrics. Understand what is it you're trying. Is it a behavior change? Is it a process change? Is it a holistic cultural change? You heard Candace reference some really good tools and methodologies around change management. Is it the change for the sake of change, which I would always say, please don't do that. That's just not healthy for the organization. And so it's really about the what and the why, and articulating that in advance so that you can then say, okay, here are the KPIs around what moved. Oftentimes, when we deliver basic training, let's just talk about management training as an example. The team will give out an evaluation. Was the content good? The presenter good? Et cetera, et cetera. But then there's no room for 6 months from now. Do we know that that manager applied those trainings and those methodologies to their employees? And so I will say to the team, okay, well, how do we know? How do we know our training was effective? This little piece of paper is great, but we need to know that behavior has changed. And so is that in decrease of employee relations issues? Is that an increase in employee survey scores? You have to really in your head articulate what is it you want to change, and walk yourself through it from A to Z. If this happens, then this happens, then this, so that you can understand what your KPIs are at the end.
Monica?
I was having trouble getting off mute for real that time. No, I think that that's absolutely on the same way I'm thinking about it too. I think it's just clear goals and objectives. The what's in it for me piece is huge. And then also, you know, making sure that leadership has that buy. I really do think that that's important, because I know there was a lot of push-pull from a leadership standpoint of what they wanted versus what everyone else wanted, and trying to bridge that gap in between of saying, hey, I know this is what you want, but the rest of the team wants this, or feels that they'd be better suited in this type of situation. So I think us as HR teams have been, you know, bridging that gap pretty strongly with that feedback. So
Candace?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that change can be very disruptive, right? In an organization, especially when there's a lot of it. So one thing that I would always say is helpful and how it affects employee productivity and motivation is actually leading people through change. So not just saying this is a change and this is what has to happen and go forth and now start working that new change, but actually leading employees through the full process of that change management life cycle. So that's definitely one of the ways that we try to enhance productivity and motivation, is by being leaders and leading our employees through the change.
Yeah, and I would just add, and I think you've all given great perspectives on it, and I would just add the transparency piece, right? I think sometimes if we go back to the communication question, I think we feel that we're communicating, but are we oftentimes when we're communicating being transparent? And so, you know, employees may say, hey, you didn't tell me this was the reason for the change, or you only told me this, or you only have said that. But I think the transparency piece is also just as important, because not only do employees appreciate that, but it continues to help build trust, right? And so, yeah, I just think this was a really good question. And so I just want to thank our panelists for a phenomenal, rich discussion. And now I'll turn it back over to Nick.
Great. And thank you all for such an insightful panel discussion. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.